So I have to say, my experiences so far have been quite different. As Mark said, I've been an actress for, well, over 15 years now, it must be, in all sorts of different domains and different areas. I've mostly worked in theatre, not so much in TV. Theatre really is my forte, and it has been really hard, I won't lie. Auditions in particular have been quite challenging for me as a deaf actress. If somebody contacts me, or if I see an advert for an audition, and then when I'm waiting to be successful for that audition, sometimes they want you to attend the next day, which can be really difficult. For hearing people, it's not so much of an issue, but for deaf people, to book an interpreter the next day is not always successful. So when you get into the audition, yeah, it's not so much of a big deal, but booking comm support can be really challenging. So it's important to have a good working relationship for me with interpreters that I know really, really well, rather than using random interpreters I've never met. So to have a small group of really skilled interpreters that I trust has been really, really important, because this has been a big challenge for me. So what I like to do is meet my interpreter 20-30 minutes before my audition, meet up with them, go through the role and my vision. Then I'll give the interpreter as much prep as I possibly can. And what this does is it will help both the interpreter and myself with working out the English content of any scripts, as well as more details such as around the character and the show. So oftentimes actresses take part in monologues. You might have heard of this before. This is really popular in something called Shakespeare. And what this means is Shakespeare wrote plays a long time ago. And as a deaf person, we have translated his monologues, which is like a long speech essentially, into BSL sign language. So this is something that I've done quite a few times with translating English into BSL. And so I've quite liked to challenge myself and get to know the characters and really get into role. So I quite like to adopt this character that I want to, become really. And I share these ideas with my interpreter. And then it's a way of working together to create a really interesting version of a character by using sign language. So you may have heard of something else called World Stage. This is linked to Shakespeare's Globe, which you may have heard of. And what we call is all the world's a stage. This is a quote from Shakespeare. And this is something that really inspires me. And this tells us that theatre is a wonderful platform for many people, but really all the world's a stage, internationally, working in France, Australia, it doesn't matter where you're from or where you're going, you can always attend the theatre and you can always share your message. You can work globally if you follow in all the world's stage. So working as a deaf actress, I've worked with Definitely Theatre very regularly, which you may be familiar with them. There are some hearing people that work and act for them as well. And it's been quite a interesting journey, so to speak. So I've before had requests made to my agent. It's important that you get an agent if you want to get into the acting world, because this can help you with getting jobs. So what else is important to consider is teaching people that you work with deaf awareness and creating like a rapport with those that you work with. So I've been working with an agent now for 5 years, which has been great. So what they do is find jobs that I could have, that I could audition for. So they help me with that. And I also employ interpreters and use VRS, just similarly to Ahmed said earlier. So access to work do support me with a budget to pay for interpreters so I can access auditions if I can get an interpreter, as I say. So, it can be quite nerve-wracking as an actress. Auditions can be quite challenging. You have to take direction really, really well. Sometimes auditions aren't sort of standing in front of people and performing. It can be more like a meeting with one or two directors. So they're often called the director and the artistic director. So it's normally with those two people and myself, sat around having a cup of tea, really. And I do like to bring an interpreter to that kind of meeting. So this in itself can be what an audition looks like as well. So again, it's important that you have an interpreter that you know well, that you work with regularly. This is what I try and do all the time. And what happens here is they will attend the rehearsal process with you. It's generally quite informal. Then you can ask more specific questions about the show. You can ask the director, what are your visions and views for the show? What's the message you want to spread? And often these meetings are quite informal, as I say, across a cup of tea. So it's quite important that even if the theatre directors are all hearing and I'm here as a deaf actress, it's quite nice to give them a new perspective. And oftentimes you can create a fantastic relationship with these really important high up, theatre professionals through really informal meetups. So, it's a really positive way of getting jobs, and a lot of the time these are very successful meetings. And then I've worked for several shows. I use 2 interpreters every day for rehearsals for most of the shows that I do. And something which is also really important is that they teach a bit of deaf awareness, because directors on the whole are quite keen to know the best way to use interpreters and how to be deaf aware. So most of my experiences have been positive. One project which was for 3 months, one was for, I've worked in tech as well. So what this involves is health and safety on the stage, and a few other elements. And also, as I say, deaf awareness. When you're working backstage, it's completely pitch black. You need to work out how the alarm systems work, how to get each other's attention. So the deaf awareness in theatre is very, very different to what you may expect in school or college or in an office. So this is something else that needs to be shared and considered when you're prepping, rehearsing for a show. So one thing that I've done before is the use of flashing lights, which is really useful. So we can check if by using lights that people are ready to go on stage. You'd sign lights out, you'd teach basic sign, you'd teach signs like, are we ready to go? Things like that. And don't get me wrong, it's been really, really challenging, and it is really long days I often work. Some days I'm working 10 a.m. till 10 p.m. It's very tiring on our eyes as deaf actresses and actors, because we're having to look all day long, obviously, and be switched on. So it's not without some barriers there. But as I say, working in theatre with interpreters is quite important. What happens is the theatre pays one interpreter and I often pay the other for my Access to Work budget. And when you're working on stage, you don't need to book interpreters for that, because you're there as an actor, as a professional on stage, and everybody has been prepped throughout the rehearsal process as to how things work with deaf people. And if something was to come up, such as an accident or an emergency, there was one accident before where one of the beams fell down. So these things do happen. And if this sort of thing is to occur, you just need to carry on with the show and make sure nobody that's come to see the show is aware of the mishap that might have occurred behind the scenes. But you have lots of people are involved with the show. You have people there to help you change quickly. And, oh, I've got no interpreter from time to time, but you've also got something called VRS, which you can use. They're there 24 hours a day, which is absolutely fantastic. So oftentimes your interpreter might be ill or not show up. All you need to do is pull your phone out or your iPad, call VRS, and there's an interpreter there on your phone at any time. Sometimes I'm working till 11 o'clock at night. Sometimes I need an interpreter last minute. And you're there sort of writing notes, which isn't really appropriate. But if you need an interpreter last minute, you can call VRS, Access to Work, pay for all of that. And it's a wonderful tool to help deaf people access work. As I say, I've been acting now for 15 years. I do have quite a strong reputation as a deaf actress. Lots of theatre goers know me. I've been writing throughout lockdown as well, because obviously there's been very little acting work, but jobs like this have come up, which is fantastic. I've also got some work for the rest of the week, and people are booking tickets to come and see me doing remote shows in this space that I'm in now. So I've got my own theatre, which is right here in my own house. I've been writing throughout the lockdown period, which has been fantastic. And being a deaf writer, it's really empowering. And it's been great being a theatre producer as well as my acting career. So thank you so much for that.